I never thought my own son would help steal my life's work, but here we are. You know, they say you never truly know someone until money gets involved. I learned that lesson at 62 years old, after 40 years of marriage, after building something beautiful from nothing, after my husband's heart gave out and left me alone in this world. My name is Margaret, and this is the story of how my daughter-in-law stole $800,000 from me, with my son's help. Let me take you back to the beginning, when life was still good. My husband Thomas and I opened Sweet Haven Bakery in 1983. We had nothing but a small loan, 2 ovens, and a dream. Thomas would wake up at 3 a.m. every single morning to start the bread, and I would arrive at 5 to begin the pastries. We did this for 40 years. 40 years of flour-dusted aprons, of burned fingers, of holidays spent frosting cakes while other families gathered around dinner tables. But we were happy. God, we were so happy. We built that bakery into something special. People came from 3 towns over for Thomas's sourdough and my cinnamon rolls. We employed 16 people. We had contracts with 4 restaurants and 2 hotels. It wasn't just a business, it was our legacy. It was going to be our son David's future. David met Jessica when he was 31. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Polished. Always dressed perfectly, always knew the right things to say. Thomas and I, we had reservations. There was something about the way she looked at our bakery, at our home, at everything we owned. Like she was appraising it all. Calculating. But David loved her, and we wanted David to be happy. So we welcomed her into our family. They got married in 2014, and Jessica immediately offered to help with the bakery's finances. She said she had experience with bookkeeping, that she wanted to contribute to the family business. Thomas and I thought it was sweet. We were getting older, the paperwork was getting overwhelming, and here was our new daughter-in-law, wanting to help. We trusted her. That was our first mistake. For 6 years, Jessica handled our accounts. She paid our suppliers, managed payroll, deposited our earnings. And for 6 years, everything seemed fine. The bakery was doing well. David seemed happy. We were a family. Then, on March 15, 2020, at 6:47 in the morning, Thomas collapsed in the kitchen. Massive heart attack. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. I held his hand as the paramedics tried to bring him back, knowing he was already somewhere else. Somewhere I couldn't follow. Not yet. The grief was. I don't even have words for it. 40 years with someone, and suddenly they're just gone. The bed is too big. The house is too quiet. Every corner holds a memory that hurts to look at. Before we go any further into this, I just want to say, if you feel a connection to these stories, a small click on that like button and subscribe would mean more to me than you know. It lets me know I'm not just speaking into the void, that you're really here with me. Alright, let's continue. For 3 months after Thomas died, I could barely function. I went through the motions at the bakery, but my heart wasn't in it. I couldn't taste the pastries I made. I couldn't hear the customers' voices. Everything was wrapped in this thick fog of grief. Jessica was there through all of it. She brought me meals. She held me when I cried. She promised me that I didn't need to worry about the business side of things, that she would handle everything until I was ready. I was so grateful. I thought she truly cared about me. It was late June when I finally started looking at the bakery's finances again. I needed something to focus on besides the empty space where Thomas used to be. I needed to feel useful again, to understand where we stood financially. I was going through our business account statements when I noticed something odd. A payment to one of our flour suppliers, $12,000. But we never ordered that much flour at once. We couldn't even store that much. I called the supplier. They had no record of any such order or payment. My hand started shaking as I pulled up more statements. There were other payments. Ones I didn't recognize. Small ones at first, $2,000 here, $3,000 there. Then bigger. $8,000, $15,000. I sat at Thomas's old desk in our home office, surrounded by papers, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Something that felt like fear, and something that felt like knowing. I called Jessica. Kept my voice calm. Asked her about the $12,000 flour payment. There was a pause. Just a second too long. Then she laughed. Light and easy. Said it must be a clerical error, that she would look into it right away. Said I shouldn't worry myself about these things so soon after losing Thomas. Said stress wasn't good for me at my age. At my age. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my empty house. Thomas's reading glasses were still on the side table. His coffee mug, the one that said World's Best Baker, was still in the kitchen cabinet where I couldn't bring myself to use it or put it away. And I knew. Somewhere deep in my bones, I knew. My daughter-in-law was stealing from me. The question was, how much? And for how long? I didn't sleep that night. I sat at that desk and I went through 2 years of bank statements. By the time the sun came up, I had found 37 suspicious transactions, totaling over $180,000. 2 years. And that was just what I could identify in one night. I needed help. Professional help. This was bigger than I thought. So I made an appointment with a forensic accountant that my friend recommended. His name was Richard, and he had 25 years of experience uncovering financial fraud. I gave him everything. 6 years of bank statements, invoices, receipts, everything Jessica had ever touched. 2 weeks later, Richard called me into his office. I remember walking in and seeing his face. He looked angry and sad. He slid a folder across the desk to me. $847,000. That's how much Jessica had stolen. Over 6 years. Systematically. Carefully. She had created fake invoices from real suppliers. She had forged Thomas's signature on checks. She had set up a shadow account that mimicked our business account number, differing by just 1 digit, and had been redirecting payments there for years. $847,000. That was Thomas's early mornings. That was my burned fingers and aching feet. That was 40 years of work. That was our legacy, our son's inheritance, just gone. I sat in that office and I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. I was beyond grief. I was angry. Richard told me I needed to go to the police immediately. That this was serious fraud. That Jessica could face years in prison. But first, I needed to talk to my son. I needed David to know what his wife had done. I needed him to stand with me. To help me fix this. To choose what was right. I invited them both to dinner at my house. Told them I wanted to discuss the bakery's future. Jessica agreed immediately, probably thinking I was going to hand her even more control. They arrived at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday. I had made pot roast, Thomas's favorite. The dining room table was set beautifully. And next to my plate was Richard's folder, filled with 6 years of evidence. We made small talk through dinner. Jessica complimented the roast. David told me about his week at work. Everything seemed normal. Then I opened the folder. I slid the first page across the table. A summary of the fraudulent transactions. Jessica's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. I kept my voice steady. Told them exactly what Richard had found. Showed them the forged checks. The fake invoices. The shadow account. All of it. Jessica went pale. Then red. Then pale again. David just stared at the papers. I looked at my son. My only child. The boy I had raised to know right from wrong. And I said, David, your wife has stolen $847,000 from our family business. From your father's legacy. From your inheritance. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Then Jessica started to cry. Not real tears, the kind you can turn on and off like a faucet. She said it was all a misunderstanding. That she had made some accounting errors but nothing intentional. That she was trying to help. That the stress of managing everything had been too much. She reached for David's hand. And I watched my son who I had raised, who I had sacrificed for, who I had loved with every fiber of my being. I watched him pull the papers toward himself, look at them for less than 30 seconds, and then look at me with something in his eyes I had never seen before. Coldness. David, I said. Your wife is a thief. And my son, my baby boy, said, No, Mom. You're just a bitter old woman who can't let go of control. You never forget the moment your child breaks your heart. Trust me on that. I sat at my own dining table, in the house where I had raised David, where I had kissed his scraped knees and helped him with homework and taught him how to be a good man, and I listened to him call me bitter. Paranoid. A control freak who couldn't accept that Jessica was only trying to help. $847,000. And he was defending her. Jessica kept crying those fake tears, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. She told David that I had been acting strange ever since Thomas died. That I was confused. That grief was making me see things that weren't there. That she was worried about my mental state. My mental state. I looked at the evidence spread across the table. Bank statements. Forged signatures. Fake invoices. Numbers that didn't lie. And I looked at my son, who was choosing to believe his wife's tears over documented proof. David, I said, keeping my voice level. I have a forensic accountant's report. 6 years of evidence. This isn't confusion or grief. This is fraud. This is theft. He pushed the papers back toward me. Told me I was embarrassing myself. That I was making wild accusations because I couldn't handle that Jessica was better at managing the business than I was. That I needed to accept help instead of attacking the people who loved me. Better at managing the business. She had stolen almost $1 million, and he thought she was better at managing the business. I turned to Jessica. Looked her right in the eyes. And I asked her directly. Explain the shadow account. The one that's one digit different from our business account. Explain how payments meant for our suppliers ended up there instead. For just a second, I saw it. The mask slipped. Her eyes went hard and cold, and I saw exactly who she really was. Then she turned to David, fresh tears streaming, and told him I was attacking her. That she couldn't believe I would treat her this way after everything she had done for me. That maybe it was time for them to step away from the bakery entirely if I was going to be so hostile and ungrateful. And David actually apologized to her. Put his arm around her shoulders and apologized for his cruel, unreasonable mother. They left 20 minutes later. Jessica took the folder with her, said she would have her own accountant review everything and prove that this was all just a misunderstanding. David barely looked at me as they walked out. I sat alone at that table until midnight, staring at the pot roast that no one had finished eating, trying to understand how I had raised a son who could look at proof of theft and call his mother paranoid. The next morning, I called Richard and told him what happened. He wasn't surprised. Said he had seen it before, family members who refused to believe the truth because accepting it was too painful. He asked if I wanted to proceed with involving the police. I hesitated. Because involving the police meant my son could face charges too. If he had known about any of this, if he had helped her cover it up in any way, he could be charged as an accomplice. But I needed to know the full truth first. I needed to know exactly what David knew and when he knew it. So I hired a private investigator. A woman named Carol who specialized in financial crimes. I gave her everything. Richard's report, access to all the bakery accounts, and permission to dig into Jessica's background. What Carol found made $800,000 seem like just the beginning. 2 weeks later, she came to my house with another folder. This one was even thicker. Margaret, she said, sitting across from me in my living room. Your daughter-in-law has been planning this for a very long time. She opened the folder and showed me Jessica's real history. Before she met David, Jessica had worked as a bookkeeper for 3 different small businesses. All 3 had reported financial irregularities after she left. One had pressed charges, but Jessica had settled out of court and the records were sealed. The other 2 hadn't pursued it because they couldn't prove anything definitively. Jessica wasn't just a thief. She was a professional. This was what she did. But it got worse. Carol showed me Jessica's bank records, the ones from her personal account. Starting about 8 months after she married David, there were regular deposits. Large ones. Matching almost exactly with the amounts missing from the bakery. She had been stealing from us almost from the beginning of their marriage. Then Carol showed me something that made my blood run cold. Text messages. She had managed to retrieve deleted texts between Jessica and a friend of hers. Messages where Jessica laughed about the stupid old couple who trusted her with their money. Messages where she called Thomas a fool for not noticing what she was doing right under his nose. Messages where she said she just had to wait for the old man to die and then she could really ramp things up. My husband. She had called my husband a fool. And she had been waiting for him to die. I couldn't breathe. I literally couldn't catch my breath. Carol got me a glass of water and waited while I pulled myself together. There was more. The text messages also revealed that David knew. Maybe not everything, but he knew something was wrong. There were messages between Jessica and David where she reassured him that everything was fine, that she would handle me, that they just needed to be patient a little longer and the bakery would be theirs. Theirs. My son wasn't just defending his wife, he was in on it. Carol asked me what I wanted to do. The evidence was overwhelming. We could go to the police right now. Jessica would definitely face charges. David probably would too. I sat there holding that folder, looking at text messages from my own son discussing how to steal my life's work, and I felt something shift inside me. I had cried enough. I had grieved enough. For Thomas, and now for the son I thought I knew. It was time to fight back. But I knew I had to be smart. Jessica was calculating and manipulative. David was under her control. If I went to the police now, they would lawyer up immediately. Jessica would claim the accounting errors were honest mistakes. She would say the shadow account was set up for legitimate business purposes and I just didn't understand modern accounting. She would paint me as a grieving widow who was confused and vindictive. And with David backing her story, it might work. She might get away with it. No. I needed them to feel safe, confident. I needed them to incriminate themselves beyond any doubt. I needed a plan. I called a meeting with Richard and Carol. Told them what I wanted to do. Richard thought I was crazy. Carol smiled and said it might just work. First, I needed to protect what was left. The bakery was still in Thomas's and my name. Jessica had no legal claim to it. But if something happened to me, David would inherit everything. And David would give it all to Jessica. So I went to my lawyer. A good man named Frank who had handled our wills and estate planning for 20 years. I told him I wanted to set up an irrevocable trust. All the bakery assets, the property, the equipment, the accounts, everything would go into a trust that Jessica and David couldn't touch. Even if I died, even if I became incapacitated, the trust would be managed by an independent trustee. Frank could see I was serious. He didn't ask too many questions. He just made it happen. It took 3 weeks, but we did it quietly, carefully. I signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon. By Friday morning, everything I owned was protected. Step 1 complete. Step 2 was harder. I had to make Jessica and David believe they were winning. That I was weak, vulnerable, losing my grip. I had to pretend to fall apart. That night, I called David. Told him I was sorry about dinner, that I had been under so much stress, that maybe he was right and grief was affecting me more than I realized. I could hear the relief in his voice. He said he understood, that he and Jessica weren't angry, that they just wanted to help me. Help me. Over the next few weeks, I played my part carefully. I started making small mistakes at the bakery, forgetting orders, mixing up schedules. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to seem concerning. I called David with confused questions about things I knew perfectly well. I asked Jessica to explain simple accounting concepts I had understood for 40 years. I watched them exchange glances. Little smiles. They thought I was losing it. Good. I started leaving papers scattered around my house. Forgetting appointments. Wearing the same clothes 2 days in a row. I was building a narrative, the grieving widow whose mind was going. The sad old woman who couldn't cope alone. Meanwhile, Carol was watching everything. She had set up monitoring on the bakery accounts with Richard's help. And just as I predicted, as Jessica became more confident that I was falling apart, she became bolder. The thefts got bigger. More frequent. She wasn't even trying to hide them anymore because she thought I was too confused to notice. In 6 weeks, she stole another $93,000. But this time, we documented everything. Every transaction. Every forged signature. Every fake invoice. We built a case that even the best lawyer in the world couldn't defend against. Carol also captured something even more valuable. She had placed a tiny recording device in the bakery office, in a picture frame on the desk. It was completely legal since I owned the business and the property. And one afternoon, when Jessica thought I had gone home early, Carol's device picked up a phone conversation between Jessica and David. I listened to that recording in Carol's office, and I want you to understand, this was my son. My baby. The child I had rocked to sleep and protected from nightmares. And I heard him laugh as Jessica described how confused I had been that morning. Heard him say that maybe they should start looking into memory care facilities for me. Heard Jessica say that once I was declared incompetent, they could take power of attorney and I would never be able to stop them. Heard my son say, "How much longer do you think we have to keep this up?" And heard Jessica reply, "Not long now. The old bat is barely holding it together. Another month, maybe 2, and we can make our move." Old bat. Carol stopped the recording and looked at me with sympathy in her eyes. I didn't cry. I was done crying. I asked her if we had enough. Enough to prove theft. Enough to prove intent. Enough to prove that David was complicit. She nodded. "We have more than enough." "Then it's time," I said. "Time for what?" Carol asked. "Time to set the trap. They say revenge is a dish best served cold." I never understood that phrase until I had to pretend my own mind was slipping away, while secretly watching my son and his wife plan to destroy me. The hardest part wasn't acting confused. The hardest part was looking into David's eyes and seeing nothing but impatience. Like I was an inconvenience. A problem to be solved. Not his mother, just an obstacle between him and my money. But I had a plan. And I was going to see it through. The morning after I heard that recording, I went into the bakery and really committed to my performance. I called our head baker by the wrong name. I asked what day it was 3 times in 2 hours. I stood in the middle of the kitchen looking lost until one of the staff members gently guided me to a chair. Word spreads fast in a small business. By noon, everyone knew something was wrong with Miss Margaret. By evening, David got 4 phone calls from concerned employees. He showed up at my house that night with Jessica, both of them wearing masks of concern that didn't quite reach their eyes. "Mom," David said, sitting next to me on the couch. "The staff is worried about you." "I'm worried about you. Maybe it's time we talked about getting you some help." Help. That word again. I blinked at him slowly, like I was having trouble focusing. "What kind of help, sweetheart?" Jessica leaned forward, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Margaret, honey, we think maybe you should see a doctor. Just to make sure everything is okay. You've been so stressed since Thomas passed, and sometimes stress can affect our memory." I let my face crumple. Let my hands shake just a little. "I know I've been forgetful. I'm scared, David. What if something's really wrong with me?" My son patted my hand. The same hand that had held his when he learned to walk. "Nothing's wrong, Mom. We just want to make sure you're healthy. And maybe we should talk about having me more involved with the bakery. Just temporarily. Until you're feeling better." There it was. The first real move. I nodded slowly. "That might be good. It's all so overwhelming sometimes. Your father always handled so much, and I don't think I realized how much until he was gone." Jessica squeezed David's arm. A little signal of victory. Over the next 3 weeks, I became the perfect confused old woman. I signed things David put in front of me without reading them, or at least that's what they thought. In reality, Frank, my lawyer, had prepared dummy documents that looked official but meant absolutely nothing. The real business documents were safe in the trust they knew nothing about. I started repeating myself in conversations, asking the same questions over and over. I would start a sentence and trail off, looking puzzled. "I left the stove on twice. Forgot where I parked my car at the grocery store." David and Jessica ate it up. But while I was playing the confused widow, I was also meeting secretly with Frank, with Richard, and with Carol. We met at Carol's office, always at different times, always making sure I wasn't followed. The trust was ironclad. Every single asset was protected. The bakery property, the equipment, the business accounts, even my house, all of it was in an irrevocable trust with an independent corporate trustee. Even if David somehow got power of attorney over me personally, he couldn't touch any of it. We also filed formal complaints with the police and the district attorney's office. But I asked them to hold off on making any arrests. I wanted to catch Jessica and David in the act of something so undeniable that no lawyer could spin it. Detective Morrison, the officer assigned to the case, wasn't thrilled about waiting. But when Carol showed him what we had planned, he agreed to give me 2 more weeks. During those 2 weeks, Jessica got greedy. She thought I was too far gone to notice anything. The thefts became enormous. $20,000 here, $35,000 there. She was bleeding the business dry, probably planning to take everything she could before they had me declared incompetent. But every single theft was documented, recorded, tracked. We had timestamps, bank records, forged signatures, everything. Carol's recording devices also picked up more conversations. Jessica and David talking about which memory care facility was cheapest. Laughing about how I had asked what year it was. Discussing whether they should sell the bakery immediately or keep running it for a while. At one point, I heard Jessica say to David, "Your mom built something valuable. It's not her fault she's too old and weak to keep it. We're actually doing her a favor by taking over." A favor. Frank had to take the recording device away from me because I was gripping it so hard I almost broke it. But the most damning piece of evidence came from a lunch meeting between Jessica and David at a restaurant near the bakery. Carol had anticipated they might talk there, so she had planted a device in Jessica's purse the day before, a tiny microphone that looked like a decorative charm on her keychain. What we heard was better than anything I could have hoped for. David asked Jessica how much longer they had to keep up the act. She told him the neurologist appointment she had scheduled for me was in 1 week. She had already prepared the doctor with stories about my declining condition. She was confident the doctor would recommend a competency evaluation. "Once we have that evaluation," Jessica said, "we file for guardianship. You become her legal guardian, we get power of attorney, and then everything becomes ours. The bakery, her house, all of it. She'll live out her final days in some facility none the wiser, and we'll finally have what we deserve." "What we deserve," David repeated. "After everything we've put up with." They clinked glasses. Actually clinked glasses to celebrate stealing my life. Carol looked at me after playing that recording. Margaret, we have enough. More than enough. We can end this now. But I shook my head. Not yet. Let them take me to the neurologist. Let them think they're one step away from winning. I want them confident. I want them careless. The neurologist appointment was on a Tuesday morning. David and Jessica both took me. They sat in the waiting room while I went in to see the doctor, a Dr. Palmer that Jessica had specifically chosen. What Jessica didn't know was that Dr. Palmer was a close friend of Frank's wife, and Frank had already spoken to him about what was really happening. Dr. Palmer examined me thoroughly, asked me questions about dates, presidents, mathematics. I answered everything perfectly. Then we sat and talked for 20 minutes about the real situation. He was horrified. Told me that people like Jessica were the reason he had to be so careful about competency evaluations. He had seen family members try to manipulate the system before. He wrote up a report that said I was experiencing normal age-related memory changes but showed no signs of dementia or incompetence. Nothing that would support guardianship. When I came out to the waiting room, I immediately went into character. I looked tired and confused. I told David I wasn't sure what the doctor said, that there were so many questions and I got mixed up. Jessica's eyes lit up. She helped me to the car like I was fragile, breakable. On the drive home, she told David loud enough for me to hear that she would call the doctor later to get the real results, since I was clearly too confused to understand what he had told me. I almost smiled. Almost broke character right there. That evening, Jessica called Dr. Palmer. Carol had arranged for the call to be recorded with his permission. Jessica introduced herself as my daughter-in-law and asked about my competency evaluation. Dr. Palmer, following the script we had prepared, told her that he had significant concerns about my cognitive state, that I had shown confusion and memory deficits, that he would be writing a report recommending further evaluation for possible guardianship proceedings. It was all lies, of course. His real report said the opposite, but Jessica didn't know that. I could hear her excitement through the phone. She thanked the doctor profusely. Said this was such a relief because the family was so worried about me. Said they just wanted what was best for me. After she hung up, Carol's recording device picked up Jessica immediately calling David. It's happening, she said. Palmer says she's incompetent. We can file for guardianship next week. Start the paperwork tomorrow. David's response. Finally. I'm so tired of babysitting her. Babysitting. His own mother. Frank filed the fake guardianship papers that Jessica and David prepared. Papers that would never actually go through because they were based on a false medical report. But they didn't know that. They thought they had one. And that's exactly where I wanted them. 2 days later, I called David and asked him to come over. Told him I needed to talk to him and Jessica about the bakery's future. That I was tired and confused and I just wanted to make everything simple. He agreed immediately. Said they would come over Saturday afternoon. I hung up the phone and called Frank, Carol, and Detective Morrison. It's time, I told them. Saturday at 2 p.m. My house. Detective Morrison asked if I was sure. Once we did this, there was no going back. I'm sure, I said. Let's end this. Saturday morning, I prepared my house. Not for a family meeting, for a reckoning. Frank brought copies of every document we needed. The trust papers that proved David couldn't touch anything. The forensic accounting reports showing every theft. The bank records. The forged signatures. Carol brought her recordings. Every conversation. Every admission of guilt. 6 years of evidence, all organized in neat folders. Detective Morrison arrived with his partner, Detective Chan, at 1:30 p.m. They would wait in my study with the door cracked, listening to everything. At 1:45, Carol checked all the recording devices one final time. We had 3 running, one on the coffee table hidden in a tissue box, one in the bookshelf, one in the kitchen. Everything David and Jessica said would be captured from multiple angles. At 1:58, a car pulled into my driveway. Carol squeezed my hand. You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Margaret. I squeezed back. Let's finish this. The doorbell rang at 2 p.m. exactly. I took a deep breath, put on my confused old woman face one last time, and opened the door. David and Jessica stood there smiling. They thought they were about to inherit everything. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. They walked into my house like they owned it. I suppose in their minds, they already did. Jessica was carrying a leather folder, the kind lawyers use. David had his phone in his hand, probably ready to record me signing away my life. They both wore these patient, carrying expressions that made my skin crawl. I played my part perfectly. Shuffled a little as I led them to the living room. Asked if they wanted tea, then forgot I had already asked. Let my cardigan hang crooked on my shoulders. Jessica guided me to the couch like I was made of glass. Sit down, Margaret. You don't need to fuss over us. We're family. Family. That word had lost all meaning. David sat across from me, setting his phone on the coffee table, right next to Carol's hidden recording device. Perfect. So Mom, he said, you mentioned wanting to talk about the bakery? I nodded slowly, wringing my hands. It's all become too much for me. The accounts, the employees, the decisions. I lie awake at night worrying I'm going to make a mistake and ruin everything your father built. Jessica leaned forward, her voice dripping with sympathy. Oh Margaret, that's exactly why we're here. We don't want you carrying this burden alone. She opened her leather folder and pulled out a stack of papers. We've been working with a lawyer, she said. Just to make things easier for you. These documents will transfer management of the bakery to David. You'll still own it, of course, but David will handle all the day-to-day operations. All the stressful parts. You can just rest. I stared at the papers like they confused me. Which in a way, they did. I was confused how anyone could be this brazen. And this, Jessica continued, sliding another document forward, is a power of attorney. It just means that if you're ever too tired or too confused to make decisions, David can make them for you. For your own protection. For my own protection. David pulled out a pen. Expensive looking. Probably bought with my money. Mom, we just need you to sign here, and here, and here. Then everything will be taken care of. You won't have to worry about anything anymore. I let my hand tremble as I reached for the pen. Looked at the papers with unfocused eyes. These documents, they'll help? They'll help so much, Jessica said. You'll finally be able to relax. To grieve properly. To enjoy your golden years without all this stress. Golden years. Like I was a horse being put out to pasture. I picked up the pen. Held it over the first signature line. David and Jessica both leaned forward, barely able to contain their excitement. Then I set the pen down. I'm sorry, I said softly. I'm having trouble seeing clearly. The words are all blurry. Could you read them to me first? I want to make sure I understand. I saw a flicker of impatience cross David's face. But Jessica remained smooth. Of course, honey. This first one just says that David will manage the bakery operations. Very simple. And this one? I pointed to the power of attorney document. That one says David can make medical and financial decisions for you if you're unable to. Just a safety measure. Every responsible person has one. Every responsible person. She was good, I had to give her that. I picked up the pen again. Hesitated. But what if I get better? What if my memory improves? Can I change my mind later? Jessica's smile tightened just slightly. Well, these documents are meant to be permanent. For stability. But Margaret, honey, you're not going to get better. You're 62 years old and you're showing clear signs of cognitive decline. The doctor confirmed it. This is the responsible thing to do. The doctor confirmed it. She really believed that lie. I nodded slowly. Then picked up the pen and signed the first document. Then the second. Then the third. But here's what David and Jessica didn't know. Frank had prepared replacement documents that looked identical to theirs. Right down to the lawyer's letterhead that Jessica had forged. I had practiced the switch a dozen times with Carol. While I was signing, I used my body to block their view for just a moment, slid their documents to the side, and signed Frank's versions instead. What I signed gave them absolutely nothing. Frank's documents were acknowledgments that I was of sound mind, that I understood the nature of trusts, and that I confirmed all my assets were properly protected in an irrevocable trust that David had no claim to. I was literally signing the papers that would help convict them. When I finished, I gathered all the documents in a confused, elderly way, mixing theirs with mine, handed the whole stack back to Jessica. She didn't even check them. Just smiled and tucked them into her leather folder. Done, she said to David. Finally done. David actually hugged me, put his arms around me and said, "You did the right thing, Mom. We're going to take such good care of you." I hugged him back, breathing in the cologne I had given him for his birthday. Wondering how this man, this stranger wearing my son's face, had replaced the boy I raised. When they left 20 minutes later, they were practically giddy. I watched through the window as they got in their car. Saw Jessica kiss David. Saw them both laughing. The door to my study opened. Detective Morrison stepped out, his face grim. Carol followed, then Frank. "We got everything," Carol said quietly. "Every word." Frank was shaking his head in disgust. "In 30 years of practicing law, I've never seen anything quite this calculated. They weren't just stealing from you, Margaret. They were systematically destroying you." Detective Morrison sat down across from me. "Miss Margaret, I want you to know, we have enough to arrest them right now. Fraud, elder abuse, forgery, conspiracy. They're looking at serious prison time." But I held up my hand. "Not yet. There's one more thing I need." "What's that?" he asked. "I need them to celebrate. I need them to think they've won completely. I need them so confident that when we finally drop the hammer, they'll have no defense at all." Carol smiled. "What did you have in mind?" "I'm going to tell them I want to have a family meeting at the bakery. Tell them I want to officially hand over the keys. Make it ceremonial. They won't be able to resist." "When?" Detective Morrison asked. "Next Saturday. 1 week from today. 2 p.m. at the bakery. In front of the staff. Make it look like I'm stepping down gracefully." "And we'll be there?" he asked. "You'll be there," I confirmed. "But they won't know until it's too late." The next morning, I called David. Used my confused old woman voice one more time. Told him I had been thinking, and I wanted to do something special. A ceremony at the bakery where I would officially pass the torch to him. In front of all the employees. Make it a celebration. I could hear the glee in his voice. "Mom, that's a beautiful idea. Really beautiful. I think Dad would have loved that." Dad would have been horrified. But I didn't say that. "Perfect," I said. "Next Saturday. 2 p.m. I'll have everyone gather in the main kitchen. We'll make it a moment to remember." A moment to remember. That was the truth, at least. That week was the longest of my life. I had to watch David and Jessica walk around the bakery like they owned it. Jessica even started rearranging my office. Moving pictures of Thomas and me into a drawer. Putting up her own decorations. She told one of the employees that there were going to be some changes around here. New management, new vision. The employee, Maria, who had been with us for 18 years, came to me in tears. She asked if I was really leaving. If everything was going to be different. I wanted so badly to tell her the truth. To tell all of them. But I couldn't risk word getting back to Jessica and David. So I just patted Maria's hand and told her everything would work out the way it was supposed to. David spent the week meeting with real estate agents. I found out from Carol, who was still monitoring everything, that he was getting the bakery appraised. Planning to sell it within 6 months. 40 years of my life, and he was ready to sell it for cash. Jessica, meanwhile, had transferred another $48,000 out of the business accounts. She wasn't even pretending to be careful anymore. Why would she? She thought I had signed over all control. She thought she was untouchable. Frank spent the week making sure every legal detail was perfect. The trust documents. The evidence folders. The recordings. Everything was organized, labeled, and ready to present. Carol coordinated with Detective Morrison. They planned exactly how it would go down. Where the detectives would wait. When they would enter. What charges they would announce. And me? I spent the week saying goodbye to the bakery in my heart. Walking through the kitchen at dawn, running my hands over the ovens that Thomas and I had bought together. Looking at the spot where he had collapsed. Remembering 40 years of early mornings and flour-dusted aprons and the smell of bread rising. This building held my entire adult life. My love story. My son's childhood. My dreams. And Jessica thought she could just take it. Saturday morning arrived. I got to the bakery at 7 a.m., earlier than I had told anyone to come. I needed time alone in the space. Time to gather my strength for what was coming. I made a batch of Thomas's sourdough. The same recipe we had been making for 40 years. Mixed the dough with my own hands, felt it come alive under my fingers. Put it in the oven and watched through the glass door as it baked. When I pulled it out, perfect and golden, I cried. Really cried, for the first time in weeks. "This is for you, Thomas," I whispered. "I'm finishing what we started." At 1 p.m., the employees started arriving. I had told everyone there was going to be an important announcement. They gathered in the main kitchen, confused but curious. Maria had brought a cake she had made at home. Others had brought cards and flowers, thinking this was my retirement party. If only they knew. At 1:45, Frank arrived through the back door. Then Carol. Then Detective Morrison and Detective Chen, along with 2 uniformed officers. They waited in the storage room, out of sight. At 1:55, my hand started shaking. Not from an act this time. From real nerves. Carol stepped out of the storage room briefly and caught my eye. She mouthed, "You've got this." I nodded. At 2 p.m. exactly, David and Jessica walked through the front door of the bakery. Both dressed up, like this really was a celebration. Jessica was wearing a designer dress. New. Probably bought with stolen money. The employees applauded politely, still not quite understanding what was happening. David put his arm around me, playing the devoted son for the audience. Mom wanted to gather everyone here today for a special announcement. I stepped forward, into the center of the kitchen. Everyone I had worked with for years was watching me. Waiting. Jessica handed David a small wrapped box. He presented it to me with a flourish. "Mom, before you make your announcement, we wanted to give you something. A token of appreciation for everything you've built." I opened the box. Inside was a necklace. Cheap. Probably cost $30. They had stolen nearly $1 million from me and bought me a $30 necklace. "Thank you," I said softly. "It's beautiful." Jessica beamed. "We just want you to know how much we love you, Margaret. How much we appreciate you trusting us with your legacy." I looked at her. Really looked at her. And I let the mask drop. "My legacy," I said, my voice suddenly clear and strong. "Let's talk about my legacy." David's smile faltered slightly. "Mom?" I turned to face all the employees. "For 40 years, my husband Thomas and I built this bakery from nothing. We sacrificed everything. We worked 7 days a week. We missed holidays and birthdays. We poured our hearts and souls into this place." The room was silent now. "And 6 years ago, I welcomed my new daughter-in-law into our family. Into our business. I trusted her with our finances. With our future." Jessica's face had gone pale. "Margaret, what are you?" I held up my hand. I trusted her. And she repaid that trust by stealing $893,000 from this business. Gasps from the employees. David stepped forward. "Mom, don't do this. You're confused." "I'm not confused, David. I've never been more clear. And you knew what she was doing. You helped her. You stood by while your wife stole your father's legacy, and then you called me paranoid when I discovered the truth." Jessica grabbed David's arm. "We need to leave. Now. She's having an episode." "An episode?" I turned to the storage room door. "Detective Morrison, I think it's time." The door opened. 2 detectives and 2 uniformed officers walked out. The look on Jessica's face. I will remember it for the rest of my life. "Jessica Thompson," Detective Morrison said, his voice official and cold. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and elder abuse. David Thompson, you're under arrest as an accomplice to fraud and conspiracy." "No," Jessica said, backing away. "No, this is insane. She's senile. She doesn't know what she's saying." Detective Chen pulled out handcuffs. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent." David looked at me, and for just a second, I saw my son again. Saw fear and confusion and something that might have been regret. "Mom," he said quietly. "Please." I looked at him. The boy I had raised. The man who had betrayed me. "You made your choice, David. 6 years ago, you chose her. You chose money. Now you get to live with that choice." The officers handcuffed them both. "Read them their rights." The employees stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Frank stepped forward with his folders. He handed one to Detective Morrison, who passed it to Jessica. "This contains forensic evidence of every theft, every forged signature, every fraudulent transaction. You're going to prison, Miss Thompson, for a very long time." Jessica's legs buckled. The officers had to hold her up. As they were being led out, David turned back one more time. The tears on his face were real. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. I didn't respond. Just watched as they took him away. When the door closed behind them, the bakery erupted in chaos. Questions, crying, confusion. Maria rushed to my side, holding my arm. "Miss Margaret, what just happened?" "Justice," I said quietly. "Justice happened." The silence after they took David and Jessica away was deafening. 16 employees stood in that kitchen, staring at me like they had just watched someone rise from the dead. In a way, I suppose they had. The confused, fragile old woman they thought they knew had vanished. In her place stood someone they were seeing clearly for the first time. Maria broke the silence. Her voice was shaking. "Miss Margaret, all this time, you knew?" "I knew," I said quietly. "And I had to let them think they were winning. It was the only way to catch them." Frank stepped forward, addressing the staff with his lawyer voice. "What you witnessed today is the culmination of a 6-month investigation into systematic theft and fraud. Margaret has been working with law enforcement, forensic accountants, and private investigators to build an airtight case. Everything you saw was real. Everything she told you was true. One of the younger bakers, Tommy, raised his hand like he was in school. So, what happens now? To the bakery? To us? I looked around at their faces. These people had been loyal to Thomas and me for years. Some of them for decades. They deserved the truth. All of it. The bakery is safe, I told them. Before any of this happened, I placed all the assets into a protected trust. Jessica and David cannot touch it. Could never touch it. This business, this building, everything your jobs depend on, it's all secure. The relief in the room was palpable. Several people started crying. But I need you all to understand something, I continued. The next few months are going to be difficult. There will be a trial. There will be media attention. There will be questions from customers and suppliers. Some of you may be called to testify about what you witnessed today. I'll testify, Maria said immediately. After what they tried to do to you? I'll tell everyone what I saw. Others nodded in agreement. Me too. And me. Count me in. I felt tears prickling my eyes, but I blinked them back. Thank you. All of you. Your loyalty means more than you know. Carol emerged from the storage room, carrying several boxes. For those of you willing to provide statements, Detective Morrison and I will be coordinating interviews over the next week. Everything will be handled professionally and with respect for your time. She set the boxes on the counter. These contain documentation you may find helpful. Timelines, key dates, and explanations of what occurred. Margaret wanted you to have the full picture, not just rumors. Frank added, and if any of you face harassment or pressure from anyone connected to this case, you contact me immediately. Margaret has authorized me to provide legal protection for every employee of this bakery. The meeting lasted another hour. People asked questions. I answered as honestly as I could. Some hugged me. Others just shook my hand, too overwhelmed to speak. When everyone finally left, it was just me, Frank, Carol, and the ghost of Thomas in that quiet kitchen. I sat down on one of the stools where I had sat 1,000 times before. My whole body ached. Not from age. From the weight of what I had just done. Carol sat beside me. How are you holding up? I don't know, I admitted. I sent my son to prison. What kind of mother does that? The kind who refuses to be a victim, Frank said firmly. Margaret, you gave David every chance. You showed him the evidence. You gave him the opportunity to do the right thing. He chose Jessica. He chose theft. He chose to betray you. Those were his choices, not yours. But he's still my son, I whispered. Carol took my hand. Yes. And that's why this hurts so much. But you're also a woman who built something meaningful, who employed people, who contributed to your community. You had a responsibility to protect that. And you did. The trial took 8 months to get to court. 8 months of lawyers and depositions and evidence review. 8 months of media coverage. Local news picked up the story. Then regional. Then it went viral online. A widow who pretended to have dementia to catch her thieving daughter-in-law and son. My phone rang constantly. Interview requests. Book offers. People wanting to tell my story. I declined all of it. This wasn't entertainment. This was my life falling apart in public. Jessica's lawyer tried everything. Argued that the accounting was complex and mistakes were made but not intentional. Argued that I was vindictive and manipulative. Argued that the recording devices violated privacy laws, even though Carol had confirmed everything was legal. None of it worked. The evidence was overwhelming. 6 years of documented theft, forged signatures. The shadow bank account. The recorded conversations where Jessica literally said she was waiting for Thomas to die so she could steal more. David's lawyer tried to paint him as a victim too. As a husband who trusted his wife and didn't know the extent of her crimes. But we had those text messages. We had recordings of him discussing the plan. We had proof he knew. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I had to sit in that courtroom every single day and watch my son. He looked so small in his defendant's chair. So much younger than 39. Sometimes he would look at me, and I would see the little boy who used to help me frost cupcakes. Other times he would look at me with something cold in his eyes. Resentment. Blame. Like I was the one who had done this to him. Jessica never looked at me. Not once. She stared straight ahead, her face a mask. The prosecution called her a sociopath. They brought in a forensic psychologist who testified about her pattern of behavior. The 3 previous employers she had stolen from. The calculated way she had targeted Thomas and me. She had never loved David, the psychologist said. She had researched his family, found out about the successful bakery, engineered a meeting. It had all been planned from the beginning. David cried when he heard that testimony, realized he had been a tool, a means to an end. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The verdict came back on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all counts for Jessica. Guilty on conspiracy and accessory charges for David. Sentencing was 2 weeks later. Jessica got 12 years in federal prison. David got 4 years, with eligibility for parole after 2. When the judge read the sentence, David finally broke. Completely broke. Sobbing. Calling out for me. "Mom, please. Mom, I'm sorry. Please, Mom." I sat in the gallery with Maria on one side and Carol on the other. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just watched them take my son away. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me. "Miss Thompson, how do you feel? Do you regret turning in your own son? Will you reconcile with him after he serves his time?" Frank ran interference, but one question made it through. A young reporter, couldn't have been more than 25, called out, "Was it worth it? Was justice worth losing your son?" I stopped. Turned to face her. Looked directly into her camera. "I didn't lose my son," I said clearly. "I lost him 6 years ago when he chose to betray his father's memory and steal from his own mother." What happened in that courtroom was simply making that loss official. The clip went viral. 10 million views in 2 days. People praised me. Called me brave. Called me an inspiration. Said I was a hero for elderly people everywhere. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a mother who had buried her husband and then had to bury her son while he was still breathing. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter. From David. Forwarded through Frank because I had requested no direct contact. Frank brought it to the bakery on a Tuesday morning. Left it on my desk without a word. Just squeezed my shoulder and walked out. I stared at that envelope for 3 hours before I opened it. The letter was 4 pages long. Handwritten. His writing had always been messy, even as a child. He wrote about prison. About therapy. About finally understanding what he had done. He wrote that Jessica had manipulated him, yes, but that he had let himself be manipulated. That he had wanted to believe her because it was easier than standing up to her. That he had been greedy and weak and had betrayed everything his father taught him. He wrote that he understood if I never forgave him. That he didn't deserve forgiveness. But that he needed me to know he was sorry. Truly, devastatingly sorry. He wrote that he thought about me every day. About the bakery. About Dad. About the life he had destroyed. The last line said, "I know I can never be your son again. But I hope someday I can be someone who would have made Dad proud." I read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't write back. Not then. Maybe not ever. I honestly didn't know. Maria found me sitting at my desk an hour later, staring at nothing. She didn't ask what was wrong. Just brought me a cup of tea and one of the cinnamon rolls I had taught her to make. "We're trying a new recipe tomorrow," she said gently. "For the cranberry walnut bread. Want to help?" I looked up at her. This woman who had stood by me through everything. Who had testified at the trial. Who showed up every morning at 5 a.m. to help keep Thomas's dream alive. "I'd love to," I said. Life continued. The bakery continued. I hired a new accountant. A firm this time, with multiple people checking the books. I promoted Maria to assistant manager. Brought on 3 new bakers to replace the workload that Jessica had pretended to handle. The business actually grew. Turns out the viral story brought attention, and attention brought customers. People came from hours away to buy bread from the bakery where the great confrontation had happened, where the widow had fought back. I didn't love the attention, but I loved that Sweet Haven was thriving. That Thomas's legacy was secure. That 16 families still had jobs and futures. A year after the trial, I established a scholarship fund in Thomas's name. For young people who wanted to learn baking or start their own food businesses. We gave out 5 scholarships the first year. 10 the second year. David's eligible for parole next month. Frank asked if I wanted to write a letter to the parole board, supporting or opposing his release. I haven't decided yet. Part of me, the mother part, wants to tell them he's learned his lesson. That he deserves a second chance. That everyone makes mistakes. But another part of me, the part that sat through 6 years of systematic theft, that heard him call me an old bat, that watched him choose money over his mother, that part isn't sure he's learned anything at all. Maybe forgiveness isn't something you decide. Maybe it's something that happens to you, slowly, over time. Or maybe it doesn't happen at all. Maybe some betrayals are too deep to heal. I don't know. I'm still learning to live with what happened, with what I did, with what I lost. What I do know is this: I wake up every morning at 5 a.m. I go to the bakery. I make Thomas's sourdough. I teach young bakers how to fold dough and proof yeast and create something beautiful from simple ingredients. I honor what we built. I protect what remains. I refuse to be a victim. And some days, that's enough. Some days, that has to be enough. So what's the lesson here? What do you take away from a story like mine? I think it's this: trust is sacred, but so is self-respect. Family is important, but not at the cost of your dignity. And when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. Even if it breaks your heart. Especially if it breaks your heart. I gave David every chance. I showed him evidence. I offered him the opportunity to do the right thing. He chose otherwise. And I had to accept that the son I raised no longer existed, or maybe never existed the way I thought he did. You can love someone and still hold them accountable. You can grieve for who they could have been while protecting yourself from who they actually are. That's not cruelty. That's survival. And to anyone out there dealing with a Jessica in their life, someone who smiles while they steal from you, who plays the victim while they destroy you, document everything. Trust your instincts. Protect your assets. And don't be afraid to fight back. You are not too old. You are not too confused. You are not too emotional or too paranoid or too anything. You are someone who built something valuable. And you have every right to protect it. Thank you for walking this difficult road with me to the very end. If this story resonated with you, you can support our community by sending a super thanks. It helps me continue to bring these important stories to light. On the screen now are 2 more stories that I know will touch your soul. I'll see you in the next one. Stay strong.